All right, everyone, welcome. With your exams coming up, we're going to create an integrated overview of the somatosensory and visual systems. Now, you might think the feeling of a breeze on your skin and the sight of a sunset are processed in completely different ways. But what we're going to uncover today is the brain's surprisingly similar playbook for both. It's a deep dive into the shared, really elegant principles our brain uses to literally construct our reality. So here's our game plan. We're going to follow the journey of a signal right from the outside world all the way up into the brain, comparing how our sense of touch and our sense of sight solve very similar problems at each and every stage. Okay, let's dive right in. See, our brain doesn't actually understand things like light or pressure directly. It speaks its own language, and that language is electricity. So our first job is to figure out that translation process. So that's the fundamental question, right? How does the raw energy of the world, the mechanical push of a tool in your hand, or the photons of light hitting your eye, how does all that get converted into the brain's universal currency? Well, the answer lies in a process that is absolutely fundamental to every single sense we have. This little bit of biological magic is called sensory transduction. It's the first, and you could argue, the most critical step in all of perception. For both touch and sight, it all kicks off with these microscopic specialists, these receptor cells that are just exquisitely tuned to one specific kind of energy. Now, what's really cool here is that these four types of mechanoreceptors, they don't work alone. Think of them as a team. You've got your slowly adapting guys, like Merkel cells, that keep firing as long as you're holding an object, telling you about its shape. And then you've got the rapidly adapting ones, like Pacinian corpuscles, that only fire when things change, perfect for detecting vibrations. Together, they paint this rich, incredibly detailed picture of our tactile world. And boom, here it is, our first major parallel. The visual system follows the exact same principle. Just like mechanoreceptors are specialists for pressure, photoreceptors, our rods and cones, are the specialists for light. So this establishes a core rule in the brain's playbook. The first step, always involves these highly specialized cells tuned to a specific type of physical energy. So once that physical energy has been transduced into an electrical signal, it needs to get to the brain, right? And it doesn't just wander around aimlessly. No, it travels along these highly organized, dedicated information superhighways. For touch, this is the main route. Now, the key thing to notice here, the thing you need to remember, is the crossover point. A signal from your right hand travels all the way up the right side of your spinal cord, and only at the very end, up in the brainstem, does it cross over to the left hemisphere of your brain. Now, let's look at the visual system. It uses a totally different strategy to solve the same problem. Instead of that late, complete crossover, it does an early, partial crossover at a place called the optic chiasm. And this is an incredibly elegant solution that lets the brain compare information from the left and right eyes, which, as you know, is the secret to creating depth perception. So here is the crucial point when we put them side by side. Both systems have the exact same end goal. They make sure that information from the right side of the world, whether that's your right hand or your right field of view, gets processed by the left cerebral hemisphere. They just get there using different but equally effective wiring patterns. Okay, before any of these signals can reach the cortex and actually become a conscious perception, almost all of them have to make a critical pit stop in a structure deep in the brain called the thalamus. Now, it's really tempting to think of the thalamus as just a simple relay station, but it is so much more than that. It's a highly sophisticated processing hub. Touch signals, they get routed to one specific part. Visual signals, they go to another. You can think of it like Grand Central Station for the senses, making sure every piece of information gets on the correct express train to its final destination. And this right here, this illustrates another core principle of brain organization. The brain loves to keep different streams of information separate for as long as it possibly can. In the visual thalamus, for example, inputs from the left and right eyes are sorted into completely different layers. It's all about preserving the fine details of the signal before it all gets integrated up in the cortex. So the signals have been translated, they've been sent up the right pathways, and they've been sorted by the thalamus. Now they arrive at the main event, the ultimate destination, the cerebral cortex. This is where all that raw data finally gets turned into meaningful maps of our world. One of the most incredible features of the cortex is that it creates maps. The somatosensory cortex has a point-for-point map of your body, and the visual cortex has a map of the space you're looking at. But here's the catch. These are not like any maps you've ever seen. They are beautifully and bizarrely distorted. This distortion has a name, cortical magnification, and it's all about neural real estate. In the famous somatosensory map, the homunculus, the hands and lips are absolutely gigantic. Why? Because they are packed with receptors and are critical for how we interact with the world. And it's the same story in vision. A huge amount of cortical space is dedicated to the fovea, that tiny central part of our retina we use for sharp, detailed vision. In both systems, brain power is allocated based on functional importance, not physical size. This groundbreaking insight from Vernon Mountcastle reveals yet another profound shared organizational principle. This time, we're zooming in to a much finer microscopic scale, the cortical column. What this means is, if you were to stick an electrode straight down through the cortex, perpendicular to the surface, you'd find that all the neurons in that column have very similar jobs. In the somatosensory cortex, you'd find a whole column dedicated to, say, rapidly adapting inputs. In the visual cortex, you'd find columns that all prefer lines of the same orientation. It's an incredibly efficient, almost crystal-like way to organize millions of neurons. Okay, for our final section, let's bring all this foundational knowledge back to the real world. Because this isn't just academic theory, this is absolutely crucial for diagnosing real neurological problems. Well, because these pathways are so predictable, so well organized, the specific pattern of what a patient can or can't feel or can't see acts like a roadmap. It can point a clinician directly to the location of the damage in the central nervous system. It's like detective work. Now, this slide is a classic, and for good reason. You will see this on your exam. If the damage is to the optic nerve before the chiasm, a person goes blind in one eye. Simple. But if the damage is right at the chiasm, where those nasal fibers cross, it knocks out peripheral vision in both eyes. And if the damage is after the chiasm in the optic tract, the entire opposite visual field is gone. By mapping what a patient sees, you can deduce exactly where the problem is. And the somatosensory system has its own incredibly powerful diagnostic map. A dermatome is just the strip of skin that's innervated by a single spinal nerve root. So if a patient comes in with numbness in a very specific pattern that perfectly matches a dermatome, a clinician knows exactly which level of the spinal cord has been injured. So let's pull all the way back. What does all this really mean? We've seen that two completely different senses have, through evolution, converged on a remarkably similar set of solutions to the same problems. It suggests the brain doesn't reinvent the wheel. It has a universal playbook for perception, a set of elegant, shared principles it uses to solve the most profound problem of all: how to build our entire reality from a constant stream of simple, raw data from the world.